In the year 1922, in the sun-scorched, silent expanse of Egypt's Valley of the Kings, a silence of over 3,200 years was about to be shattered. This desolate valley, a royal cemetery for the pharaohs of the New Kingdom, was believed by many to have already given up all its secrets. For years, the tenacious English archaeologist Howard Carter, a man defined by his stubborn belief and meticulous methods, had toiled under the oppressive Egyptian Sunday. His search, funded by the wealthy and adventurous 5th Earl of Carnarvon, was for a ghost, a near mythical figure, the lost tomb of a boy king named Tutankhamun. The world of Egyptology had largely written off the search, but Carter's obsession was unwavering. He believed, with an almost religious fervor, that Tutankhamun's final resting place still lay hidden beneath the sands, untouched by the ravages of time and the greed of tomb robbers. On that fateful November day, his faith was finally, spectacularly rewarded. After years of fruitless digging, his team unearthed a single step cut into the bedrock, then another and another, forming a hidden staircase descending into the earth. It led them down into the darkness, to a doorway, plastered and stamped with the intact, intricate seals of the royal necropolis. The air was thick with anticipation. The silence of the world seemed to gather in that small, subterranean space. With trembling hands, Carter made a tiny breach in the corner of the doorway, just large enough for a candle. He lifted the flame to the opening and peered into the void beyond. Behind him, Lord Carnarvon, his heart pounding with the excitement of a lifetime's pursuit, asked the now immortal question, "Can you see anything?" For a moment, Carter was speechless, overwhelmed by the sight. Hot air escaping from the chamber caused the candle to flicker, making the golden objects within dance and glitter. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw it, a treasure trove beyond imagination. Strange animals, statues, and gold, everywhere the glint of gold. He turned, his voice thick with an emotion that was part awe, part disbelief, and could only stammer, "Yes, wonderful things." But what if, alongside those wonderful things, they had also found something else? Something ancient, unseen, and sinister. For as the world celebrated this incredible discovery, the single greatest archaeological find in history, a dark whisper began to circulate among the local workmen, a whisper that would soon grow into a global roar. It spoke of a curse, a potent pharaonic vengeance sworn to protect the king's eternal slumber from any and all who would dare disturb it. The story began with what many would call an omen. Carter, a man of science, kept a small pet canary in a cage at his home, its cheerful song a sliver of life in the desolate landscape. The Egyptian workmen, deeply superstitious, saw the little yellow bird as a symbol of luck, a bird of gold that would guide them to the golden treasure they sought. On the very day the tomb was officially breached, Carter returned to his house to find a horrifying scene. The canary was dead, brutally killed by a cobra that had somehow entered its cage. A cobra, the very symbol of the pharaohs, the uraeus, the protector of kings which adorned their headdresses. The workmen were terrified. To them, the meaning was clear. The sacred serpent of the pharaohs had struck its first victim. It was not a coincidence, it was a warning. At the time, Carter and Carnarvon dismissed it as a grim, but natural, event. But soon, the coincidences would begin to pile up, each one more tragic and mysterious than the last. The legend of Tutankhamun's curse was born, a story of death and misfortune that would captivate and terrify the world for a century. Today, we will reopen that file. We will not just retell the ghost stories and the sensational headlines. We will sift through the evidence, examine the scientific reports, and separate the chilling facts from the seductive fiction. Was a supernatural force of vengeance truly unleashed from that golden tomb? Or is the truth something far more rational, and in its own way, just as fascinating? Let us, together, seek the answer. Our investigation into the curse must begin with its most famous and pivotal victim, the man whose passion, wealth, and unwavering support for Carter made the entire discovery possible. George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Lord Carnarvon was the quintessential British aristocrat of his era, charming, incredibly wealthy, and an enthusiastic amateur Egyptologist. His fascination with ancient Egypt began as a way to escape the cold, damp English winters. which were detrimental to his health after a serious motoring accident in Germany had left him with recurring lung problems. For him, the search for Tutankhamun was the ultimate adventure, a grand pursuit to leave his mark on history. He had poured a fortune, the equivalent of millions of dollars today, into Carter's excavation, year after fruitless year. By 1922, both his patience and his funds were wearing perilously thin. He had summoned Carter to Highclere Castle, his ancestral home, to inform him that this season of digging would be their last. It was Carter's impassioned plea, and his offer to fund the final season himself, that convinced Carnarvon to make one last gamble, and it had paid off beyond his wildest dreams. He was present for the grand opening of the burial chamber in February 1923, standing shoulder to shoulder with Carter as they laid eyes on the magnificent golden sarcophagus for the very first time. He was on top of the world, his name forever etched into the annals of history, but his moment of supreme triumph would be tragically and mysteriously short-lived. Just a few weeks later, in early March, while staying at Luxor near the tomb, Lord Carnarvon was bitten on the cheek by a mosquito. In the grand scheme of things, it was a minor, everyday annoyance in the Egyptian climate. But a few days later, while shaving with a cutthroat razor, he accidentally sliced open the now swollen bite. The small wound became infected. This, too, should have been a manageable problem for a man of his means. But the infection did not heal. Instead, it worsened with terrifying speed. Carnarvon developed a high fever, uncontrollable shivering, and chills. The infection, a streptococcal infection, entered his bloodstream, leading to septicemia, or blood poisoning. From there, it attacked his already weakened lungs, and he developed a severe case of pneumonia. His health, always fragile since his accident, collapsed completely. He was rushed to the Continental Savoy Hotel in Cairo, where the best doctors of the day were summoned to his bedside. They fought desperately to save his life, but the infection was too aggressive. In the early morning hours of April 5th, 1923, less than 2 months after he had stared into the face of his eternal legacy, Lord Carnarvon passed away. He was just 56 years old. A tragic, premature death, but one with a clear medical cause in a pre-antibiotic era. However, it was the bizarre events that reportedly coincided with his passing that transformed a personal tragedy into a supernatural legend. The story, embellished and spread like wildfire by the press, goes that at the precise moment of his death in Cairo, all the lights in the city flickered and went out, plunging the capital into a profound, eerie darkness for several minutes before power was restored. As if that wasn't enough, another, even more incredible tale emerged. Hundreds of miles away, at his ancestral home, Highclere Castle in England, Carnarvon's beloved fox terrier, Susie, who had been his constant companion, suddenly began to whine and howl mournfully at that very same moment, and then dropped dead. The news exploded across the globe. It was too much to be a coincidence. The mosquito bite, the razor cut, they were merely the earthly instruments of a far older, more patient executioner. The press, hungry for a sensational story, had found the narrative of a lifetime. Newspapers ran screaming headlines of the Pharaoh's curse. They invented a fictitious inscription, supposedly found carved above the tomb's door. "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." No such inscription ever existed, but it didn't matter in the slightest. The story was too good to be ruined by mere facts. The public was enthralled, the curse was real, and Lord Carnarvon, it seemed, was only the first to fall to its ancient, inexorable power. With the dramatic death of Lord Carnarvon, the stage was set for one of the greatest media frenzies of the 20th century. The world was now watching, waiting, and almost hoping for the curse to claim its next victim. The newspapers, understanding the public's morbid curiosity, were more than happy to oblige. Every death, every illness, every minor misfortune that befell anyone even remotely connected to the excavation was now scrutinized, sensationalized, and attributed to the pharaoh's vengeful wrath. The list of alleged victims began to grow, with each new name weaving a more compelling narrative of supernatural retribution. One of the next to be prominently featured on this grim list was George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier and railroad executive. A personal friend of Carnarvon's, Gould visited the tomb in May of 1923, shortly after it was opened to the public. He was given a personal tour by Howard Carter himself, and was, by all accounts, fascinated by the discovery. Almost immediately upon his return from Egypt, while traveling in the French Riviera, he came down with a sudden, violent fever. His health deteriorated quickly, and he died of pneumonia on May 16, 1923. The press immediately drew the parallel to Carnarvon's death. Another wealthy visitor, another tour of the tomb, another sudden fever, another death from pneumonia. To the public, this was no coincidence. It was a clear and terrifying pattern. The curse, it seemed, did not discriminate based on nationality. Then there was the tragic case of Aubrey Herbert, Lord Carnarvon's half-brother. He was born with a degenerative eye condition and had been slowly going blind for years. He suffered from depression, and after his brother's death, he became obsessed with the idea that he, too, was cursed. He believed his brother's spirit was haunting him. Seeking a radical cure for his blindness, his doctors advised him to have all of his teeth extracted, a shockingly misguided medical theory of the time that infected teeth could cause other ailments. He died in 1923 from blood poisoning following the dental procedure. While his death had clear medical causes related to a dangerous and unnecessary surgery, his close familial connection to Carnarvon was all the media needed to add his name to the growing list of the cursed. The narrative continued to build. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a respected radiologist, was said to have died from a mysterious illness in 1924, shortly after he was sent the mummy of Tutankhamun to X-ray to determine the cause of death. Arthur Mace, a key member of Carter's excavation team who had helped physically remove the final wall to the burial chamber, died in 1928 from pleurisy and pneumonia. His death was officially attributed to exhaustion from years of arduous fieldwork, but in the court of public opinion, the pharaoh was the true culprit. Richard Bethel, Howard Carter's personal secretary who helped catalog the tomb's contents, was found dead in his bed in a London gentleman's club in 1929. The cause was ruled as smothering, and it was widely considered a suicide, but the curse narrative suggested a more sinister, unseen force had driven him to it. In a truly tragic and bizarre epilogue that seemed to confirm the curse's long reach, Bethel's father, Lord Westbury, who had a collection of Egyptian artifacts given to him by his son, was said to be distraught over the death. A few months later, in 1930, he threw himself from his 7th-floor apartment in London. The note he left behind reportedly read, "I really cannot stand any more horrors and hardly see what good I am going to do." As if that weren't enough, the hearse that was carrying his body to the cemetery then struck and killed a young boy playing in the street. It was a horrifying cascade of tragedy, and at the center of it all was the silent, golden king, Tutankhamun. Even those who had never been to Egypt were not safe. Wolf Joel, a South African millionaire, was entertained by Lord Carnarvon in Egypt and heard all about the discovery firsthand. Shortly thereafter, he was shot and killed in Johannesburg in an unrelated incident. The connections became more and more tenuous, but the narrative was too powerful to be stopped by logic. The public imagined a vengeful spirit, an ancient entity reaching out from the grave, its ghostly fingers stretching across continents to exact its terrible revenge. The story was given an air of intellectual credibility by none other than Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the master rationalist Sherlock Holmes. Doyle, who in his later years had become a fervent believer in spiritualism after the death of his son, publicly declared that Lord Carnarvon's death was not caused by a mosquito, but by elementals, evil spirits created by ancient Egyptian priests, specifically to guard the royal tombs. His endorsement gave the curse theory immense weight and legitimacy in the public eye. The story was no longer just a sensational newspaper headline. It was now a topic of serious debate in parlors and pubs across the Western world. The Curse of Tutankhamun had become a global phenomenon, a modern myth built upon a foundation of tragedy, coincidence, and a deep-seated human fascination with the supernatural power of the ancient world. The question was, could any of it possibly be true? As the legend of the curse captivated the world, a quieter, more rational group of individuals, scientists, doctors, and skeptics began to look for answers not in the realm of the supernatural, but in the cold, hard light of evidence and logic. They were skeptical of the ghost stories and believed that a series of explainable, if deeply tragic, events were being woven into a myth by a sensationalist press and a public eager to believe. Their primary and most powerful piece of evidence was the man at the very epicenter of the discovery, Howard Carter himself. If the curse was real, if a vengeful spirit was truly striking down all who disturbed the tomb, surely he, the man who had planned the search, who had physically breached the sacred seals, and who would go on to spend a decade meticulously cataloging every single one of the 5,398 artifacts within, would be its primary target. Yet, Howard Carter seemed entirely immune. He lived for another 17 years after the discovery, working tirelessly to preserve Tutankhamun's legacy, and died peacefully in his London home in 1939 at the age of 64 from Hodgkin's lymphoma. A natural death at a reasonable age for the time. In fact, when researchers and statisticians went back and looked at the data, the entire case for a supernatural curse quickly and completely fell apart. A famous study, published years later in the prestigious British Medical Journal, sought to definitively test the theory. Researchers tracked the survival of 44 Westerners who were identified from records as being present in Egypt during the excavation and the opening of the tomb. The study found that of the 25 individuals who were potentially exposed to the curse, their average age at death was 70 years old. There was absolutely no statistically significant difference in their lifespans compared to people of the same age and background who had not been to Egypt and had not been exposed. The majority of the so-called victims had died of common, explainable illnesses. Lord Carnarvon and George J. Gould died of pneumonia, a deadly threat in the pre-antibiotic era. Aubrey Herbert died from complications of a barbaric medical procedure. Many others on the list were already elderly when they visited the tomb and passed away from age-related causes years later. The narrative was a fabrication, built by carefully selecting a few tragic cases while ignoring the majority who were completely unaffected. So, if it wasn't a curse, what did cause the death of Lord Carnarvon and the others who fell ill? The answer likely lies in the tomb itself, not in its spirits, but in its science. For 3,200 years, the tomb of Tutankhamun had been a perfectly sealed environment. Any bacteria, viruses, or microscopic mold spores present at the time of burial were trapped inside, along with the air, the funerary food offerings, the floral collars, and the mummy itself. When Carter's team broke that ancient seal, they weren't just stepping into a historical treasure chest. They were stepping into a sealed petri dish that had been incubating in the dark for over 3 millennia. This is the basis for the most compelling and widely accepted scientific explanation, the tomb toxin theory. Modern science has confirmed that ancient, sealed tombs can be hazardous breeding grounds for potentially dangerous pathogens. Molds such as Aspergillus niger and Aspergillus flavus are commonly found in such environments. When the seal of a tomb is broken, these dormant spores can become airborne. If inhaled, they can cause a range of reactions, from mild allergies to severe respiratory problems. In individuals with weakened or compromised immune systems, they can lead to a dangerous and often fatal infection called aspergillosis. The primary symptoms of a severe aspergillosis infection: high fever, chills, and pneumonia, a near-perfect and chilling match for the very illnesses that afflicted both Lord Carnarvon and George J. Gould. We know that Lord Carnarvon's immune system was already compromised from the lung damage he sustained in his car accident years prior. He was the perfect target, not for a pharaoh's spirit, but for a microscopic, opportunistic fungus that had been lying in wait for thousands of years. The air inside the tomb, once thought to be filled with vengeful spirits, was more likely filled with something far more mundane but just as deadly: dust, mold spores, and bacteria. The curse, it seems, wasn't written on the walls in hieroglyphs. It was floating invisibly in the very air they breathed. So, what is the final verdict on the Curse of Tutankhamun? When we meticulously strip away the layers of myth, media hype, and supernatural fantasy, we are left with a fascinating and revealing case study in human psychology. The enduring story of the curse is not really about an ancient pharaoh's vengeance. It is about our own deep-seated, very human need to find patterns in chaos, to attribute meaning to tragedy, and to believe in forces beyond our immediate understanding. The deaths were real and tragic, but their perceived connection was a product of a powerful cognitive bias known as selection bias. The newspapers and the public focused intensely on the handful of people connected to the tomb who died in the years following its discovery, while conveniently and completely ignoring the much larger group who lived long, healthy, and unaffected lives. As we've noted, Howard Carter, the main desecrator, lived a full life for nearly 2 decades after. Lord Carnarvon's own daughter, the vibrant Lady Evelyn Herbert, was one of the very first people to enter the burial chamber, standing right beside Carter and her father. She lived to be 79 years old. Dr. Douglas Derry, the anatomist who performed the first autopsy on Tutankhamun's mummy, lived to be 87. The statistics simply do not support the existence of a supernatural curse. The strange coincidences that added so much fuel to the fire, like the infamous Cairo blackout and the simultaneous death of Carnarvon's dog, also have perfectly logical explanations. Cairo's municipal electrical grid, in the 1,920 seconds, was notoriously unreliable. Power outages were a frequent, almost nightly, occurrence. It was a simple coincidence that one happened on the night a famous earl died in a prominent hotel. And the story of the dog, while poignant and dramatic, is a classic piece of journalistic embellishment. It's an anecdote that is impossible to verify and first appeared in the newspapers, not in any of the personal journals or letters of the family or staff at Highclere. The truth is that the idea of a curse was simply more exciting, more romantic, and infinitely more marketable than the mundane reality of a streptococcal infection in a pre-penicillin world. It tapped into a post-World War I society that was both fascinated by the exoticism of the past and deeply wary of the hubris of disturbing the old world. It was a perfect storm, a groundbreaking discovery, a tragic and well-publicized death, a fiercely competitive and sensationalist press, and the human brain's innate desire to weave disparate events into a compelling story. In the end, perhaps there is a curse associated with Tutankhamun, but it is not a curse of death. It is the curse of fame. The boy king, who ruled for a short time and was a relatively minor figure in the grand sweep of Egyptian history, has been transformed by this discovery into a global icon, his golden mask arguably the most recognized artifact on the planet. His story, and the story of his tomb's discovery, has become so inextricably entwined with the myth of the curse that it is now impossible to separate them. The true magic of Tutankhamun is not a supernatural power to kill, but an archaeological power to reveal. His tomb, miraculously preserved from the ravages of time and the greed of ancient robbers, has given us an unparalleled, frozen in time, glimpse into the life, art, religion, and beliefs of a civilization that shaped the course of human history. That is the real treasure that Howard Carter unearthed. The gold, the chariots, and the jewels are merely artifacts. The true legacy is the knowledge, the wonder, and the enduring mystery that continues to draw us back, time and time again, to the golden world of the boy Pharaoh. The greatest mystery of all is not how a few people died over a century ago, but how a civilization so ancient, so distant, could still hold such a powerful and unbreakable grip on our modern imagination. The whispers from Tutankhamun's tomb have long since faded, replaced by the quiet, steady voice of reason and science. But the allure of the mystery, the romance of the curse, remains. The stories we tell about the past often say more about us, our fears, our hopes, our need for wonder, than they do about the events themselves. We seek magic in a world we constantly strive to understand, and we find patterns and meaning in the face of the unexplainable. The curse of the Pharaoh may be a myth, but our fascination with it is very real. It speaks to our innate respect for the dead, our primal fear of the unknown, and our unending human quest for answers that lie just beyond the veil of what we know. Thank you for joining us on this journey to separate fact from fiction, to peel back the layers of legend and look at the truth within. If you are captivated by the secrets of the ancient world and the stories buried in the sands of time, subscribe and join our community of explorers. There are many more tombs to open, and many more mysteries to solve. Until next time, continue to question and continue to explore.